We're counting down the top 10 research mistakes that we see radio stations make, and we're up to finding number 3, bad screener math. So when we talk about screeners, what we're referring to is the recruiting strategy to get a proportionally representative of a sample of the population or a particular format into a study. And today we're going to cover screening for music tests, screening for perceptuals, and some key mistakes that we see stations make based on segmentation, particularly when it comes to those who are an integral part of the strategy but don't speak English. And those are the kind of the 3 things we'll cover, Lee. But the one that's near and dear to my heart, because I learned the lesson the hard way years ago, early in my career, about the fallacy of P1.
Sure. I mean, and we see it all the time where, well, I want the sample of my cume. Everybody in my music test has to be our cumers. Half of them have to be our P1s. Well, okay. And half of them have to be my competitors' P1s.
Yep.
Well, if half of your cume converts to your competitors' P1s, you're in trouble. Those people really should not be that numerous or that easy to find.
That's right.
And listen, if it's a one-time music test, a library test that we do, an OMT, if you will,
yep.
Yeah, fine. If that's the only way you can imagine doing it, we can probably bend on that. If it's ongoing weekly music testing or monthly, then it gets a little tougher because you're going to overfish the water. So your choices become, you could allow in some of the competitors' cume to get that level of their core.
Yep.
I will always argue at that point that music testing is by nature a TSL tool. So if people aren't listening to your station, you're not going to impact their TSL to you.
That's right.
If they're not cuming you, but they're cuming the competitor, maybe you can argue with me that gives you some extra strategic insight into how that station's programmed. Okay, fair enough. But otherwise, there are people who can't listen more to you unless you tell them that you're doing something different, and that's a call with their marketing unit.
Yep. I fear coming across as a pitch person for Nielsen's adjunct products, but I think there is one important study that's key to look at when you get your ratings back, and assuming that your company subscribes to PD Advantage. One of the reports I like would be the percentage of your cume that converts to P1 with your competitor, and vice versa, your competitor's cume that you convert to P1. And while we don't believe necessarily in quoting by P1, it's a good guideline that keeps you from over-recruiting your own partisans, and especially the costs that start to be incurred when if there's no more than about 12% of the audience that gives you any sort of, or gives your competitor any sort of TSL that's part of your cume, and you're trying to get 25 or 50% of them, well, you're just not going to, you're going to either get a bad test or somebody's going to come back and say you're going to pay more.
Right. And we try to push back on that, often gently. And as I said, the easy thing to do in those cases is to allow in some of the competitors' exclusive cume, or those who don't cume your station. But, it's just a matter of being realistic with what's actually out there.
Right.
And being guided by the numbers. I mean, none of these are absolutes. We're all playing in probabilities. But it's a matter of turning the tables in your favor.
And I think it's a good idea to mention at this point that one of the other things you have to understand is that the population in general is very different from the subset of folks that will accept a meter, and particularly, or a diary, and particularly the ones that are what we would call heavies, or ratings prospect heavies, a term Lee came up with, RPS yes and RPS heavies. We've got a new study out that we're now agreeing to share with members of the industry, whether they're new Voodoo clients or not, right, Lee?
Right, absolutely. And we've distilled it down this time to a half a dozen things, 6 things that really can have an impact. If applied correctly, I think can really have an impact on your spring rating. So why wouldn't you? It's a free call. So hitting us up with an email at tellmemore@newvoodoo.com will get you on the schedule. And you got a private session if it's all the PDs in your cluster, or part of your group or management team. we think this format works better than the webinars we've done in the past because you can ask questions in real time. We can have a discussion more, which I think is better than me just droning on. You've seen enough of my perceptual presentations, Mike, to know that I eventually just drone on.
Yep. And if you book an appointment with us, no sales pitches are involved. This is our marketing to the industry. And the reason we open this up to any commercial radio station management team or corporate staff is because we think it's important to give back to the industry that's fed us now for nearly a decade and a half. And listen, we're big fans of radio. The reason I bring this up is because one of the things you'll see is just how tiny the percentage of the population is that will accept a meter or diary and will give an appreciable amount of time spent listening to radio. You'll understand that PUM might be a little bit of an overinflated number, but getting back to the problem at hand that we're discussing today, it's all about avoiding what I like to call cooking the books and overly focusing on too narrow a sliver of your radio station that's not realistic, given the diversity of music taste preferences, even within your format game. Fair enough?
Sure. I mean, it used to be just the reflex for a lot of us who maybe have a gray beard or losing hair. Wait,
Yep.
that's me. That for the new CHR, if you were trying to, insert a new CHR in town,
Right.
you went in underneath demographically, you went in beneath the established heritage player.
Yep.
And the thing that fights against you in 2024 is that would have you serving teens who, frankly, are really fickle users of radio if they use it at all. And if they are using it at all, it's probably in mom or dad's car at some point.
Yep. All right. So that's music testing. And we see a mistake in terms of proportional representation of the format game that you're playing to convert people who are maybe light listeners to P2 or P3. I use those words hesitantly. But we also see and conduct lots of research that comes from perceptual studies and format searches. And I think let's talk about perceptuals for a second, because there are some really bad practices that can infect your perceptual that cause you then to make really costly mistakes.
Well, sure. I mean, in a music testing scenario, be that our call-out replacement or a library test, it's fair to specify we need, all our cume and this percentage of our core listeners. Fair enough. In a perceptual study, part of the game is knowing, well, how well do we convert to core? So specifying a core level, works against getting optimal information.
Right.
Specifying that we're going to have this much of, the competitive station's cume versus what, reality might be.
Right.
Again, distorts things and has the potential, Mike, as you said, to end up making uninformed decisions.
Yep. Restaurant analogy is you've got your regulars who come in and day out or week in and week out, and advertising to them can potentially upgrade their time spent dining.
Right.
But it is the folks who rarely come in who need to be notified about the new food. And so if you're going, or the new special. And so if you're going to do that, then you need to recruit people who are using other restaurants more regularly. And when you talk to just the people who you've already got as regulars, and then you expect to increase the share of dining, well, you're basically talking to the people left that are the customers you're pleasing. And if that number doesn't drive profitability, you're really sunk. So it is important to be wider when it comes to your music, but especially your perceptual testing.
Yep, absolutely. It needs to reflect reality as best it can.
Now, finally, I know one of the big mistakes we see, and especially as markets grow increasingly diverse, where we have significant percentages of Latino audience, and they can be English speakers primarily, bilingual, or they speak their native tongue.
Sure.
And when you research for Hispanics and make big decisions, there is a glaring red flag if you don't understand that.
Well, the temptation is always, as we're designing a study, and this is especially, any place in the Southwest where there are very large Hispanic components to their audiences. And it's, well, we're 65% Hispanic, so we want the test to be 65% Hispanic. Well, okay, what percentage of that Hispanic population is Spanish primary?
Right. Meaning
Okay,
non-English
well,
speaking. Yep.
right. And it's often a significant percentage because
Half
there
or
are
more.
inevitably,
Yep.
Spanish language stations in that market that curry favor with that audience.
Yep.
And then you ask, well, how much of your station's airtime is in Spanish? And if it's none, or it's next to none because it's a wild line in a commercial or some
Mhm.
imaging piece or a line in a song, or it's even a song itself at some point.
Or you have no intention of presenting content in a second language.
Right. Then those people are off the table. So then we need to adjust the Hispanic component of the Hispanic target, I should say, of
Yep.
the sample to match what's really within your grasp, what's in your wheelhouse. That said, I've conducted dozens of studies in, again, principally Southwest markets where there are stations that are in Spanglish or have enough of a foothold in Spanish that, okay, let's do bilingual interviewing. That's
Yep.
easy for us to do. It's not a problem. It's not, it's not a challenge. It's just knowing who you really need to get
Yeah.
answers from.
And Lee, we've inherited enough new projects from disgruntled former clients of other providers where they made decisions about what they think was pleasing the Hispanic listener base in their market, but they were only looking at the English speakers because they only fielded the study in that language.
Right. And they often are doing, comparatively better among the English primary or significantly bilingual, portion of the Hispanic audience in their market, but they think they're somehow getting shortchanged because they're not getting Spanish speakers to listen to their all English presentation.
We should note that when we see a market that has a significant percentage of Spanish primaries, we always branch our studies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Bilingual studies.
Yeah. Easy to do.
And any extra charge for that on top of our base pricing?
Not in most markets, not at all.
Yeah.
There are some cases where for, a variety of reasons I don't need to go into here, but it can be slightly more expensive to achieve that population. Okay, so we'll come back a little more expensive if that's the goal. But I don't think we've lost a project on price in a while.
I guess I can share the big mistake that I took the blame. I don't think it was my fault. And, I was working for a corporation that was just hired a big Spanish division senior vice president, and so the goal was to get into as many formats as possible. And we were going to be smart about it and do research and do perceptual studies to make sure we were hitting the mark. But our research was all in English at the time. And we were looking at the opportunity was far greater if we actually paid attention to the tastes of the Spanish-speaking primaries. And so that was a costly mistake. It resulted in a 3-year waste of time and an expensive flip eventually. So I would argue that that is something that can be in the millions if you do it wrong.
Well, and that was, I'm fairly certain we're talking about a day and age when that research was being conducted on the phone. And back then, it was a lot more expensive to conduct Hispanic interviewing when today.
Yep. And it's a lot easier to empanel primary Spanish speakers using online methodology, which 100% of what we do now, very difficult and no longer representative to use the phone.
Yeah, exactly. Never was really.
Great. If we didn't say so, New Voodoo is making those study presentations available, and you can reach us at tellmemore@newvoodoo.com. Lee Jacobs is the executive vice president of research analysis, and I'm Mike O'Connor, the marketing guy. We'd love to help you. Stay tuned for finding number 2 as our countdown of the top 10 research mistakes that stations make rolls on.
New Voodoo builds digital products and conducts research and marketing campaigns for clients.
It's easy to get in touch. Drop us a line at tellmemore@newvoodoo.com.